I haven't said anything. I think we're all set to go though, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We're on the air. Okay. Good evening, members of the public, committee members, applicants, and those members that are online. I see David. I don't see Vance yet. Are you on, Vance? Okay. Regardless, we still have a quorum, so everybody but Vance is here so far, so that's 8 members. So we'll call the meeting to order then. Item number 1 is meeting number 22-10, October 20th, at the planning office in St. Stephen. Number 1 is the approval of the agenda. I'd be looking for a motion for that.
I'll make a motion.
Moved by Annette.
I'll second.
Seconded by Gerald. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Number 2, approval of the minutes from our meeting on September 15th, 2022. Meeting number 22-09. Everybody has a copy of the minutes. Are there any errors or omissions that anybody has noted? David, okay, minutes? Okay. You want a motion? Okay, moved by Dennis, seconded by Brian. Clerk the question, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carried. Item number 3 is your time to declare a conflict of interest if you have one. Hearing none, we shall move to item number 4. Similar to or compatible with application. Item 22-10-01, St. Mary's, excuse me, First Nation.
That is my file, Mr. Chair, so
Okay,
I will
you have
jump
the
into
floor.
it. Thank you. All right. Go. So as you said, this is in the Shamcook Local Service District. Property is owned by St. Mary's First Nation, and it's an application to consider a lobster holding facility similar to or compatible with a light industrial use. The property is a no longer serviced, there's a little typo there, no longer serviced 1.25 acre shorefront property. There used to be at least water coming from the Shamcook Lake line that went down to the town of St. Andrews, but that is no longer used and is not at all part of this application. It's in the rural zone, not a residential zone specifically. And I'll get into that in a little bit. And at one time, it looked like up until 2011, there was a seafood processing facility on the site. I believe it was operated by St. Mary's First Nation. I think they did soft shell clams. Not sure if there were some other products there as well, but that was definitely there. And the application is for a 7,000 square foot lobster holding facility to be considered similar to or compatible with a light industrial use. And light industrial uses are allowed in the rural zone. In terms of the actual facility, it would have 2 holding tanks for the lobsters with a combined capacity of 80,000 pounds. There would be no processing occurring, only storing and packing and distributing from there. The water would come from salt and freshwater wells on site. And given that it's a lobster facility, activity would be at its highest during lobster season, which is typically August to October. During that time, there might be 4 to 6 cube vans a day, 2 to 3 tractor trailers, and 8 employees on site. The biggest concern from staff was odor mitigation, and stringent odor mitigation plans would be in place and part of the conditions. And as I said before, light industrial uses are allowed in the rural zone. So as per the rural plan, a light industrial use means the use of land, buildings, or structures for the making of finished products or parts usually from already prepared materials, including the processing, fabrication, assembly, treatment, packaging, storage, sales, and distribution of such products or parts, but but excluding conventional industrial uses and not resulting in the emissions of odors, fumes, noise, cinder, vibrations, heat, glare, or electrical interferences. And then there's an additional condition in the rural plan for such uses, and that they be non-polluting. And that would feed back into that definition in terms of what the use results in, and that the use develops and maintains a 5-meter landscape buffer between the industrial use and adjacent properties. So the rural plan allows for these uses by right. It does have a few conditions for them. This is the subject property. And there's the zoning for it. It's on what is sometimes called Shamcook Point. Here is the site plan. It's a little difficult to see the building outline here. It's this gray outline here. So these are the tanks inside the building. There would be a loading area inside of the building that trucks would back into. And this is a rendering of what the building would look like from the exterior. And these are some photos from the site. This is looking towards Shamcook Harbor. This is the neighboring residential property, as seen from the subject property. This is Shamcook Harbor, and you can actually see there was some dulcing or rockweed harvesting going on the day I was there. And this is a site, this is a property to the south of the property. It's the end of the point. And it's an interesting property. I think there was a manufacturing use there at one time. And now it has some uses. I think the owner allows some of the rockweed harvesters and the other kind of fishing stuff in the harbor to use the property as an access point. The Shamcook Rural Plan does not deal with sea level rise, but it's worth looking at, and it could be a condition if it was a concern. But based on the provincial sea level rise mapping, the building would not be impacted even in the worst case scenario for a 2100 storm surge. So sea level rise is not a concern based on current projections. This is the Community Planning Act, Section 55(1), which authorizes the advisory committee, subject to terms and conditions, to allow a proposed use of land or building otherwise not permitted under the zoning bylaw if the proposed use is sufficiently similar to or compatible with the use permitted in the bylaw for the zone in which the land or building is situated. We did a 200-meter mail out as per the PRAC operating procedures, and didn't hear a lot initially. In the last few days, communication picked up, and there was some concern that this was not actually a wide enough mail out. But again, this is the PRAC's operating policy, so staff followed it. Given that the property will be in the town of St. Andrews after local government reform, we did engage the CAO of the town, who didn't want to give any opinion on the actual file, but he did not have any concern with PRAC rendering a decision on it. There was no feeling that this should be held off until the town, and frankly, there would really be no authority to do so. It's still several months away before the town would be making decisions over this property. The rural plan policies are a good guide, and in terms of residential uses, it is a policy to discourage the intrusion of incompatible uses into established residential areas. And there is certainly residential development in the area, but both this property and the property to the south of it have been used for manufacturing and seafood harvesting and processing. And you see that use in the harbor now. So I think it's reasonable to say that this is a mixed use area, and the zoning certainly implies that it is. The rural zone allows for many different uses, and residential is only one of them. And the policy for industrial uses and light industrial uses is that they be non-polluting and non-harmful to the environment. And again, that feeds back to the definition. The applicant can speak more to this, but my understanding is that lobsters in these facilities are essentially dormant. They're in pretty cold water and they go to sleep, and they don't really produce any waste. And the only concern is from lobsters that die in holding. That's when there's a potential for odor, but that can be mitigated with conditions. So with similar to or compatible, it is PRAC's responsibility to ensure that the resulting impacts are not outside the norm for this zone. And again, the definition of light industrial includes packaging, storage, and distribution of products. It does not, like the rural plan does not consider aquaculture or fishing at all. It's not mentioned at all in the plan. It's not excluded. It just was, I think, not a major industry at the time the plan was written. So the closest analog would be light industrial. And the design of the building is typical for light industrial in terms of a warehouse or even processing facility. That's pretty standard. Again, typical traffic and employees for that use. Distribution would imply trucking. So trucking would be typical light industrial use. And the major thing is that they be non-polluting. And from my understanding of lobster facilities, really the thing that can go wrong is odor. So there is a condition regarding that. And just because again, there is residential development in the area, so it's good to mitigate any potential impact as much as possible. There are conditions regarding light, noise, and hours as well. There was some question as to why this did not have to have an EIA, and it's because it does not meet threshold for one. There's actually a fairly high threshold if you read the act that relates to that. The province is aware of this application and has really not given us any feedback to say it should need an EIA. And again, if something meets all the criteria for a PRAC application, the application goes to PRAC, and this has met all the criteria. So there's absolutely no reason why PRAC cannot make a decision on it. The recommendation from staff is that the use be considered similar to or compatible with a light industrial use subject to the following conditions. Any dead animal waste shall be stored in sealed odor-proof containers inside the facility or in a refrigerated trailer on site before being disposed of off-site at an appropriate facility. No loading shall occur between the hours of 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. The property shall be kept in a neat and orderly manner. All lighting to be directed downward and motion activated when possible. At least one off-street space not less than 9 meters long, 3.5 meters wide, and 4 meters high with access thereto shall be provided for loading. But that is the space inside the building as on the site plan. A 5-meter landscape buffer shall be developed and maintained between the use and adjacent properties. And all other requirements of the Shamcook planning area rural plan are to be followed, as well as all provincial, federal acts and regulations. The applicant, I am pretty sure, is in attendance, and I will note, I think a lot of the attendees here tonight, and there are a number are here for this application. So I will leave that with you, Mr. Chair, to facilitate the discussion from here on.
Okay, thank you, Xander. I just have one question of you before I call on the applicant. You stated the lobster season is from August to October, but there's a spring lobster season as well. Is that a misprint or it's important?
I would let the applicant speak to that
Okay.
as to what they expect their peak season to be.
Because it is an important part of it that we know, how many months of the year it's going to operate. So there is a substantial spring and winter lobster fishery. Okay. So I would call on the applicant if they're here to present.
Mr. Chair, I see a hand raised from Jeremy Paul, which I'm going to promote to a speaking role.
Okay.
Good evening, guys. Thanks for everybody's time tonight. So,
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Paul.
can everybody hear me? Xander, can you hear me clearly?
You're good, Jeremy.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
we can.
Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks for everybody getting together tonight. Much appreciated. I know everybody's busy and lots on the go. Yeah, I noticed right away, the lobster season dates that was in the notes, that must be for LFA 25. We are in LFA 36, which is March 31st until June 29th. And then again in the fall, second Tuesday of November till January the 14th. So it's basically 5 months of the year for the local lobster fishing area there. I mean, some of you guys may be aware of that as well. I guess right now, yeah, a little bit of background. Some of you guys may know that used to be a urchin slash clam processing facility, and it was purchased through St. Mary's First Nation from, I believe, a guy named Allison Adams, if I'm correct. And it was in operation right up until about 2007 or 2008, at which point it didn't pass the CFIA regs, and it was, it was shut down. At the time, I wasn't in my role as the director of fisheries for St. Mary's. I came on that role in 2009, and in 2010, I decided to get rid of the eyesore facility and, get rid of the buildings and all the debris around there. And it took us this long, I guess, to come up with a plan to how to utilize the property. We've had lots of interest from many groups and partners on, different ideas to develop it. Everything, from grounds to fancy, rental properties to whatever. But we've come back. We have 7 lobster licenses for the area, so we want to start, utilizing it and making a more lucrative fishery for our community. So that's where we're at, I guess. Any other questions? Feel free to ask away.
Any questions, Mr. Paul? Just
Timeline was mine, that was it.
yeah, just a question on the season again. It's a 5-month fishing season, but does that relate to a 5-month operation season, or is your operating season and distributing and so on longer than that?
That would be the peak times, them 5 months
Okay.
when our local area is done. I mean,
Right.
we may hold the lobster to, I guess to make more of a profit margin off it once the season's closed. And, especially like in January, if we were to hold them until February, generally they're worth quite a bit more into the hard part of the winter.
Okay. So most of the traffic would be in the lobster season, though.
Yes.
You're
In
saying.
Yep.
In the peak season.
Yep. That's
Okay.
yeah.
All right, fair answer. Thank you. David, do you have any questions?
I guess the only question comes to my mind is, will your product be shipped into and out of the facility entirely by truck and vehicle, or are there plans to have the shorefront utilized to bring in your product?
No, right now there's no plans to bring in anything from the shore. Mostly cube vans, like trucks that can get down around the wharf and back and forth. I mean, there may be certain times where you might need a tractor trailer to ship product out, which isn't going to happen a lot. Most of the movement's going to be cube trucks, 1-ton cube vans and stuff like that size.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Paul.
I've
Go ahead, Vince.
got one question, just, this might be for Xander, I don't know, but it's, to do with it says no loading shall occur between the hours of 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. What about unloading? You're probably unloading at different hours than that, would you?
I basically, it's the trucking activity should not be happening between 7 and 8 p.m. That's the intent. So if PRAC feels like that needs to be modified, then that condition could be modified.
I think we should just put that in there for the unloading too. Because you're unloading, they're gonna be taking it from the wharf up, so there's gonna be some boats that are coming in late.
Well, we just hold off on that till we hear the others. Taking that at the end, we'll make that recommendation. That's a good point. Okay, are there any others online that wish to speak in favor of this project?
Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing any other hands raised, but if there's anyone online who's wishes to speak to this file in favor, please raise your hand and I'll promote you to speaking role. We'll go to people who have questions or concerns later. Here is Grant Horwood, who I'm going to be promoting to the speaking role. And Grant, if you just want to introduce yourself.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm not going to say much else from what Jeremy said. Jeremy is the owner, obviously, and they'll be the operator. We're the project managers on the firm, on the project, so we were involved in the concept design, some of the specifications, and just to kind of speak a little bit on the pollution. Everything will be treated, so any discharge that would come from this would be basically clean water. And like we said, the intakes are coming from wells, so there would be no pollution. I don't think you would notice the activity from the outside. Technically and operationally, I wouldn't have anything else to say, but in general, this would be a clean site, fully landscaped, paved, and operations would be inside of that facility.
Thank you, Mr. Horowitz.
You're welcome.
Any others in favor?
Mr. Chair, there's no other hands raised to speak in favor of the application.
Okay, then we would ask if there are any people that would like to speak in opposition to this, and then following that, Mr. Paul would have a chance to respond.
Right, so I'm going to promote Gail Reed to a speaking role.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Gail Reed, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of myself and my husband, Steve Williams. We live in the property directly adjacent to the property that is being discussed right now. So we're at 39 St. Andrews North Road. I would like to start by saying that we are not welcoming of this development, as was stated on page 3 in the planning report. And I'm deeply offended that my comments, which were made regarding the placement of a barricade on this property. So I stated that the barricade was great because it prevented the people from camping and partying on the lot. And that statement has now made it into this official planning report saying that I'm in support of this, and we definitely are not. We would much rather have someone pitch a tent or throw a party, even if they're doing it illegally, beside us than having a 7,000 square foot lobster holding facility. So needless to say, we are not in support of this application, and having a permanent facility being run 24/7 is not the same when you're living beside it as having some trucks run with dulse or some tractors take boats in and out of the harbor. I come from a family of real estate agents. So when we moved here in 2017, I definitely looked up the zoning and was happy that we were zoned rural. I realized we had 2 vacant lots on either side of us. We were looking forward to other families building their dream homes on those vacant lots. This application is requesting a lobster facility with light industrial use being allowed to be put there. So as you can well imagine, a 7,000 square foot lobster facility with 3 to 4 vans, 4 to 6 trucks, 8 workers, 80,000 pounds of dormant lobster was not what we were envisioning as our neighbors, even when we thought of the worst possible neighbors we could have. So this comes as a great surprise to us. And we are wondering, as well as was brought up as well, the recommendations state that between, there will be no loading between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. What about unloading, as was already mentioned? What about the trucks moving? What about the staff moving? What about, the alarms going off to hold all of these lobsters if something goes wrong with the water or the temperature? This is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week endeavor that we're talking about. So for us, it will be like living beside a fully industrial area. I have 2 children, we have a dog, we spend a lot of time outside. That is not what we envision spending our time beside. This is definitely, in my opinion, industrial use. Mr. Chair, I have a few questions. One regarding timing. This application was received August 29th. The mail out to the residents was done on October 14th. So Mr. Gopin, I know you said that there wasn't a lot of information coming to you until recently. Well, that's because we were given 4 days to decide what our response to this was. We weren't aware that the application had been submitted until last Friday. So we've had 4 days to do this. Why were we given such a short notice on this? My second question is a meeting of objection no longer given or required for this, because we were not given obviously any time to have a meeting of objection? Was an advertisement printed, or is that no longer needed? And if it was, when and where was that done? Also, the letter, the community engagement, as Mr. Gopin stated, was given a 200-meter radius. So that was myself, my neighbors, 2 neighbors to the north and 2 neighbors across the road. There are 5 more residents on St. Andrews North Road, 2 on Moss Road, 40 on Harkness Road, and a potential of 55 homes in Stone Ridge Estates. Now, most of those people don't even know that this is happening. We were able to reach out as many as possible in the last 4 days, but it is going to impact all of those people and significantly affect their investments and their property with all of the truck increased traffic. So, Mr. Chair, I respectfully ask that this application is turned down. I don't believe that it is light industrial use. This is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I realize that they're saying that it's 5 months peak time fishing time, but if you're holding the lobster to get a higher price, it's going to be more than that. So for us living here, the reality is we are living beside an industrial site. And if this goes forward, we're going to have to take our losses. I mean, our property value is going to significantly decrease, and we will seriously have to consider moving away. My husband, who is the superintendent of the Algonquin Golf Course, I know will be greatly missed by many local residents who are golfers, as well as the tourism industry, since he's been working there for the last 6 years. They've brought in a ton of money to this area through the improvement of their golf course.
I'm going to ask you, Mrs. Reed, to keep on point with this.
Yes, and that is everything. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. And on the questions, I think what we'll do is hear from the others first that have a concern, and then we'll have Mr. Gopin and or Mr. Henderson explain the process of the the neighborhood notice and so on, because some of the others that are going to speak may have the same questions or similar. So is that fair, Xander, or did you want to address it now?
I might as well address the mail outs and notices now, because I'm sure lots of people have this question. I try to address them in the presentation. Again, we go by the operating policies of PRAC, and they state a 200-meter mail out for rural applications. And there's a notice period for mail outs. They need to go out 5 days before the application, as per the PRAC operating procedures. So typically we get an application and it's a long time before we actually have all the information, and we even know what type of application it's going to end up being. So there's always time between when an application is received and when a mail out goes out, and 4 or 5 days is the typical amount of time for all PRAC files that people have. In regards to why isn't this getting public hearings? Public hearings are required for zoning amendments, and This is a variance application, so it's in PRAC's authority. Again, from the Community Planning Act, mailouts are required, or they're recommended, strongly recommended, so we definitely do them. But there is no higher threshold for a particular project, just because it may cause neighborhood concerns. So those are my answers to those questions.
Thank you, Xander. Do we have another speaker, Alex, in opposition?
Mr. Chair, we have Debbie Grant who wishes to speak, so I'm going to promote Debbie to a speaking role. And just if you've been promoted as well and you're not speaking, if you don't mind to please mute your microphone because we are getting some background chatter there. So thank you very much. So, oh, there we go. So Debbie, if you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sitting with Ken Waywood, he lives 3 properties up from the proposed area. Also sitting with Chazelle and Lanlau, which owns the majority of Stone Ridge Estates, which she has bought for future development for residential. I also live on Ross Point Road, so within, a 3-minute drive to the area, and it's a major concern. I'm a community-based realtor. I've been working in this industry for almost 6 years now. And when we are out promoting St. Andrews and the wealth of our property and attracting like-minded people to come in from different provinces and different areas, there's never a time that we're selling large acreage with beautiful homes on them are we thinking that somebody is going to be putting light industrial use beside a residential area. To my knowledge, in different times of this subject property, the 1.25 acres, a couple industrials have been rejected because of the septic system. So has anybody done any environmental studies regarding the septic system? As well, the St. Mary's First Nation started the same project in Grand Manan a few years back. I think it was about 6 years back. And at that time, they aborted the project, and all the garbage and everything left over from that site is still sitting there. So what happens if they
Excuse me, Mrs. Grant. Please don't refer to another job or speculate on what somebody may or may not have done. That information is irrelevant to us. Please stick to
thank you, Mr. Chair. In the last 350 days, we've had 57 homes sell in Shamcook, Bayside, and St. Andrews area. And with the upcoming amalgamation of St. Andrews and Shamcook and Bayside, I think it's very important that we focus on residential so that our neighbors are not industrial. At this time, I would ask Ken Waywood if he's able to speak, as Ken and Chazelle Lanlau were unable to navigate getting on their own computers at their own homes.
Okay, we're okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. I have a lot of concerns about this proposal, but I only really have time. I'm going to limit it to 2. The first relates to the quality of the seawater from the wells. About 25 years ago, Nelson Adams, the current owner, at the time enlisted the help of a research scientist at DFO to see if the well water would support sea urchins. The experiment was a failure, and the animals died. He had the water analyzed by RPC in Fredericton, and several anomalies were noted in the analysis. The water was not the same composition as the water in Passamaquoddy Bay. And he couldn't remember, I spoke to him on the phone, he was on vacation, what the exact anomalies were they were heavy metals or some other ions. But he had some concern that that water might not support animals. Now, the reason I bring this up is that the proponents, I believe, should present detailed analysis of that water so we can determine if the well water is not suitable, or do a study with lobsters because if that water is no good, then there's no point in having this project and it shouldn't proceed. My second concern is noise. The PRAC report puts noise on the same insignificant threat level as cinders, electrical interference, and vibrations. Obviously, someone did not do their homework. The sources of noise that we're going to experience will include air blowers. Well water has virtually no oxygen in it. It's got to go to almost full saturation. And then the oxygen levels have to be kept in a certain range where the lobsters are. The way to do this is with air blowers, which are high RPM air pumps, basically, and they have a high whistling sound that I've experienced my whole career because I am an aquaculture research scientist. In addition to that, the lobsters are kept at very low temperatures. And this is going to involve refrigeration systems. You can imagine keeping water at 5 degrees in August. They're going to be huge. They're going to be noisy. In addition to that, we will have air conditioning units probably in the buildings, pump noise, generators, reefers on trucks. The proposal already admits that there will be a full-time truck reefer going because the frozen mortalities of the lobsters have to be kept frozen. So they say they'll put that in a truck. So there's going to be noise there. Backup alarms on trucks. During the day, every time a truck backs up, you get that ding, ding, ding noise, and that's enough to drive people crazy. Some of these noises will be 24 hours. So I want to conclude by saying noise is definitely going to be a problem. It will affect an area much greater than the 200 meters that we talk about. And that level of noise is inconsistent with the concept of light industrial use. This project belongs in an industrial park. The noise itself is enough to disqualify it from where it's being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wywood.
And I would ask that Gisela Landau speaks, please, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
I appreciate the chance to talk to you today. I own a big swath of about 200 acres adjacent to this project. Only in between, it's about 50 meters of water. So every pollution which comes from there, especially noise, which I'm concerned about, will reach my property. I am being a property developer in Toronto for more than 30 years. And I moved here and bought this property for my retirement age and to build houses. I bought it from a developer who has already 11 put out properties there, which we are paying for 30 years, or for 20 years he paid property tax on it, which are in sight of that building, which is definitely very austere. And after that, we have another 30 basically habitable places to build buildings. We have private covenants there for 20 years to keep the trees growing. No one is allowed to cut without our agreement trees. We kept it nice and quiet. And you are coming with that. For me as an investor, that thing was a failure, despite that I'm living here. And I would like to finish my days in St. Andrews, where I'm living for 30 years by now. I do not see that I am going to live with a whistling sound from those cooling machines. You will lose me, and you will lose my investment. I will lose money on you, maybe, but the investment will be gone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time for all three of us to talk.
Thank you for your input, Mrs. Grant and Mr. Wywood, and forget the other lady's name there, I didn't get it. Anyway, thank you for that. Are there any other speakers opposed?
Mr. Chair, there is. I'm going to promote Ray Taylor. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Ray Taylor to a speaking role.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Taylor.
It's actually Dr. Julie Levesque Taylor speaking. My husband's the one who put the Zoom on. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So my concern is about the road that the trucks will use to get back and forth to the proposed facility. If any of you have seen the size of St. Andrews Road North and Harkness, it is difficult to even get two cars when one car comes one way and then the other way. There's no sidewalk. You have to kind of pull over a little bit. Those roads are not meant for trucking. Plus, that is the road that my two children use to walk to their bus stop, which is on the corner of North St. Andrews Road and Harkness. And so having large trucks, even if it's cube vans coming around that blind corner that is right from North St. Andrews Road to Bayview, is a safety hazard. And quite frankly, I don't think the road supports that trucking use. I think I agree with what's been said before. This project would be much better served somewhere near Bayside in an industrial park where you have ready access to the 127. And that small road is not set up for this kind of activity. And I think it's unsafe for the kids that are waiting at the bus stop, my kids and all the other kids that are there. And I think that it is unsafe, period, just for the size of the road. And I think that transportation infrastructure should have been consulted on this project prior to bringing it forward. That's what I had to say. I agree with everything else that's been said about the noise, et cetera, but I'll keep my comments short as it's already been brought up.
Thank you for your input, Mrs. Taylor. Any other speakers?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to promote David Sullivan to a speaking role.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, this is actually Beth Campbell, David's wife.
Okay.
And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to express some concerns. And I'd say off the top that we do share concerns voiced by our neighbors, but would like to focus on what we consider vague and limited information provided that doesn't really allow us or even the PRAC to make an informed decision about this proposal. When we're talking about what's exclusionary, I wonder how much noise is too much noise. I did visit the, and I know this is not this, it's a different facility, but I have never seen a lobster holding facility before. So I visited the facility in Dipper Harbor, and they have a 24-hour refrigeration noise that sounds much like a low-flying small aircraft, which goes on 24 hours a day. So it's not intermittent. And they also have the regular backup beeping of cube vans, forklifts, and tractor trailers. And while I was there, which was for about 10 minutes, I heard that 3 different times. I don't know how much light in what is otherwise what a blissfully dark neighborhood. It's there, it's rural. How much light is too much? How much vibration from the passing trucks, which if there are 10 in a 13-hour period, could work out to almost hourly during our waking hours. And I'd say this information, along with other details, are extremely important for us to have in order to make an informed decision about a proposed land use that could indefinitely impact our quality of life. The neighborhood we are talking about, regardless of what you call it, is predominantly residential, with an emerging subdivision that people have made significant investment in due to its tranquility, views, remoteness, yet proximity to town, and even its darkness at night. And I would say there's a lot at stake for a lot of people, and it is not a ruling that can be made lightly.
Thank you for your input. Next
Mr. Chair,
speaker.
we have Bruce Reed, who I'm going to promote to a speaking role.
Okay.
And again, if you're not speaking at the present, just please mute your sound. Thank you.
You have the floor, Mr. Reed.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, we can.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members and staff for the opportunity to address the committee. My name is Bruce Reed, and I'm here representing my daughter who has already spoke, and I'm not going to repeat anything that Gail said. Gail and my son-in-law, Steve, as Gail said, live at 39 St. Andrews Road North, where they reside with their two young daughters. I agree with virtually everything that's being said in opposition to this application, but I'm going to take a little bit different tack and I'm going to refer to, if I might, Mr. Chairman, I want to refer to the Shamcook planning. Maybe I should just say that I do have a development real estate background. I spent 30 years on a committee of adjustment and land division committee, 22 years as a chair. So I do have a little background in planning and committees of adjustment. So having said that, I'd like to refer to the Shamcook Planning Area Rural Plan Regulations. On page 3 of that, under the objectives of the plan. So this is the general objectives of the Shamcook Planning Area Rural Plan Regulations, Community Planning Act. There's about 10 or 11 bullet points there. And I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to try to be as quick as possible, Mr. Chairman. But the very first bullet is to preserve the area's rural character and lifestyle. Number 2, to preserve the historic and cultural heritage of Ministers Island. And number 3, to preserve the area's aesthetic beauty for both residents and tourism. So I'd like the committee to keep that in mind as they assess this application. If this application meets those objectives. In the same plan, under policies and proposals, under residential uses, which this is, unless I'm wrong, I stand to be corrected, but this is shown as a rural plan that is residential. And it says there, I find it interesting because, and I typically, and I hate to be critical of staff, but there seems to be selective points out of this plan that are put in the planning report. So I want to just read the 3 bullets under residential use. It is the policy to discourage the intrusion of incompatible uses in established residential areas. If this isn't an established residential area, I don't know what it is. Number 2 bullet, it is the policy to permit residential development that reflects the existing character of the area. Number 3, it is the policy to permit those home occupations which are intrinsic to the rural area, which provide or supplement income, which diversify the local economic base, and this is the important part, which do not conflict with the existing rural character of the area. Now, I'll just do that. The last one, C, is industrial use. It is a policy to only consider light industrial use that is non-polluting and non-harmful to the environment. So there isn't even an allowance in this area for what your planner calls conventional industrial uses, which in my humble opinion, that's exactly what this facility is, a conventional, as other speakers have stated, a conventional use. I'll just quickly now, Mr. Chairman, go through the actual report. So as staff has rightly stated in their planning comments, this needs to be similar or compatible use. So we have to determine, is this industrial, in my view, industrial use, similar or compatible? And under residential uses, the staff has said it is a policy to discourage the intrusion of incompatible uses in an established residential area. And then the planner's note under that says the way they believe it is compatible is because it used to be used for a former manufacturing site. And then it goes on to say, as well as active seafood harvesting in the water indicates the area is more of a mixed use than exclusively residential. I'd question that, Mr. Chairman. This is anywhere first of all, the manufacturing site doesn't exist anymore. In fact, when the Shamcook plan was put in place, they designated this residential. And to say that because there used to be a manufacturing facility, now it falls under the light industrial, really think that's a stretch. To say because we saw some fishermen out there or seaweed harvesters that brings it into a mixed use. When I go there multiple times a year, this is a residential area, as other speakers have said. I'd like to then just go to the industrial uses. The planners note, held lobsters are dormant and do not produce waste. The major concern regarding pollution is odor, which can be mitigated by conditions. Even in the report on the last page or the second page, the author of the report says the proposed solution / condition was discussed with the applicant. And here's the key word, and is expected. Not that it will mitigate the polluting odor, but it's expected. I mean, my question is, shouldn't there be something that says it does? On to definitions. Again, we have to read these in their entirety and can't pull out, in my view, in my humble opinion, we can't pull out what we want here to make something work. Again, we've got to go back. Is it similar to or compatible with? And if we go to the definition, light industrial use means the use of land, building structures for the making of finished products, blah, blah, blah. The last part is the important part, but excluding conventional industrial uses. So even if you could argue that it does fall into the criteria, but it says, but not resulting in emissions. We've already odors, fumes, noise, cinder, vibrations, heat, glare, and electrical interference. I would propose to you, Mr. Chairman, that we've already been told it's going to produce odors. We know it'll produce fumes just from the trucks that will be there. We know, we've heard there will be noise from the fans, from the...
Mr. Reed, I'm going to ask you to summarize. Some of those points have already been made to do with the noise and trucks and so on. So,
okay,
there may be some more speakers there, and
okay,
we'd like to give the applicant a chance to respond to those as well. So try and wrap it up as you could.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will just say on that definition, there's 8 points. I propose to you that it doesn't meet the odors, fumes, noise, or glare. And it's obvious by the conditions that have been put in. And down under discussion, it says the closest analog is light industrial. I would propose to you that it is their closest analog because they don't allow conventional industrial uses. So, Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, this is, in my humble opinion, not a minor variance application. It does not meet the tests that are put forward. It doesn't meet any of the policies in your area plan. This should be a full-blown rezoning application if the applicant wants to go forward. So I would ask the committee to consider good planning and let this go the route that it should go and turn this application down. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Reed, for your input and the points that you've made. They're certainly worthy of consideration. Do we have another speaker?
At this time, Mr. Chair, we do not have any other speakers. So I think the normal order of business would be to circle back with the applicants if they have any questions which they can respond to. So I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Paul, Jeremy Paul, would you like to respond to some of the questions? Oh, sorry. Would you like to respond or at this time to some of the concerns and questions? That the speakers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to respond. Just I'll try to keep it brief as possible.
Okay.
First off, I'll say I'm a father of 3 young children myself, so I respect everybody's, their mind being around children's safety and walking to school and bus stops and all that. I respect that very much. One of the comments didn't sit very well with me on, I guess, insinuation of St. Mary's having another failed project in Grand Manan. We have no operations, no fishing enterprises, no buildings, no assets whatsoever in Grand Manan. So that's completely false. I did speak with Gail and Steve in the summer of 2021, and apologize, I don't remember their last names. I didn't write it down. They're the adjacent neighbor, the immediate neighbor to our proposed facility. And they, at the time, in summer of 2021, they seemed like they were kind of in favor of what we were doing, happy the place was finally going to be shut down to the free camping, and that it was going to be built into something. So they seemed very positive at that time. However, that's been, 14, 15 months have gone by. They've obviously reconsidered their opinion. I can't speak too much on the water issue. Grant knows all the technical details around the salt water and the freshwater well. However, the saltwater well, I do know, it passed the regulations or specifications we needed to hold live lobster. It exceeded the expectations we needed there for the saltwater well. We do have issues with the freshwater well, but I don't know the details of that. You guys, one of the comments mentioned, cultural heritage and the cultural component and the heritage of Minister's Island. Before that was developed by the colonialists, it was our people that we had the culture and heritage around that area. Just want that to be noted on the minutes as well. At this point, I'm not going to go over too much more about the opposition. Obviously, there's lots. I will turn it over to Grant to talk on the more technical side.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
I'm just going to talk on a couple of points that were just a response to a couple of questions. So Jeremy spoke about the well. We did have the well tested. There is some work to be done on that well, the saltwater well, and we will be putting in a drone for a new freshwater well. But it did pass the requirements that we were looking for. There will be oxygen added, as was a comment from one of the neighbors. So there will be oxygen blowers. We do add oxygen to the water. With respect to the septic system, so we did have a phase 1 environmental assessment as well conducted on this site, and the septic system wasn't an issue, so that was confirmed through the phase 1 environmental assessment, and there has been a concept design done for the septic system. So, and there was a former septic system on that site that was decommissioned. So just to kind of respond to that. There is pumps, obviously, recirculations with this facility. This would all be contained within the building, and would be sound control walls, but they are existent in the building. I think that's the only response to the questions technically that I had.
No comment on the refrigeration, which was steady noise.
So there would be refrigeration in the site, and the water is cooled. So there would be some cooling of the water. At this point, we do have no air conditioning in the buildings. The buildings are not air conditioning, but there would be some cooling of the water. It's not a lot that you would see in a typical fish aquaculture facility, because the biomass is a lot less for the lobsters because they do kind of go dormant, but we will be cooling the water.
Thank you, Grant.
You're welcome.
That concludes the public commentary as per our operating procedures. I believe, the office, that's correct.
That's correct, unless a member wishes to recall someone to ask a question at this time.
Okay, so I'll open it up now to the committee members and so on. I'll just ask one question. And then open it up to the other members. When you're talking about similar and compatible, and we're talking about a rural zone, not a residential zone, is that correct? It's a rural
Yes,
zone?
that's correct. It is not a residential zone. It's a rural zone, which includes commercial, light industrial, lots of different uses. And I think the question, and as it was raised by members of the audience, is this similar to or compatible with light industrial use, or is it something more? I think that's really what's being asked.
Okay, so could you tell me just maybe off the top of your head, if this lobster plant did not go ahead, what other types of things could go ahead there without a variance based on the fact that it's a rural zone?
I think wood shop for sure. That would be a typical light industrial use. If you think of some of the things in the St. Stephen Industrial Park, not like a flake board, that would be a conventional industrial use, that for sure. But the cabinet makers, those kinds of things would be typical light industrial. Blueberry facilities would be light industrial, the freezers for them.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. So the bottom line is that there could be other uses there perfectly legal that are not residential.
Certainly, yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right, I'll hold my tongue and let others ask some questions or comments if they have them.
I'd just like to know what are the plans to mitigate light and sound pollution?
Mr. Horwood?
So light pollution, we haven't done the lighting design at this point. We weren't planning any, I guess, light standards. Everything would be lit from the building. So we would just have some lighting at the loading dock, main entrance door. That could certainly be pointed down. It would be pointed down at the ground. It wouldn't be any sky lighting, and certainly wouldn't be any street lighting or light standards. So it would be minor lighting in this facility.
Anything else for like a sound buffer for the trucks and everything that's going to be going in and out?
So we wouldn't be able to control sound of the trucks. That's not something that we could do with the development. The building would obviously be, highly insulated for sound. Anything that's operating inside the building, but outside, truck use is not. That would be an operational. Jeremy may be able to speak to that. That would be something operational. It's nothing technically or design wise that we could do to control truck noise.
Yes.
Yeah, and what about the unloading? Is your unloading and loading there? Usually when you unload, it's when the fishermen come up from up to the wharf. And how late is that gonna run?
Mr. Paul?
I never caught the last part of that question. I'd like to hear that again if possible.
Okay. The question had to do with the unloading. You've specified in there the hours for loading, but there's no specification for unloading. So one of our members, Dennis, said the concern is that unloading is not addressed in this application, and that typically in lobster season, the catch comes in late at night at the end of the day, and then it gets unloaded. So
Said 3 a.m. at Dipper.
well, excuse me, the chair is speaking right now, and we're asking this question of Mr. Paul. So we're not taking any comments from the public at this point. Mr. Paul, could you answer that question?
Yeah, I guess I'll answer it to the best I can. I mean, we have 7 fishing boats. Everybody's on different schedules. We got some guys that like to come in 4, 5, 6 o'clock. And yes, there would be other vessels that would come into the wharf later on at night Could be 8, 9, 10 o'clock or later. But we were prepared, and we still are prepared to, do the loading and unloading in them times stated in that document. Just because the vessel comes in at, say, 3 a.m. doesn't mean the lobsters have to come to Shamcook at 3 a.m. They can be held overnight. 5 of our shipping vessels have live wells that can hold a lot of live lobster in the live well in the vessel itself.
Okay, thank you. That is a condition then that could be put in there. Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Just a question is that, Mr. Chair, the board of the trucks, say they do get unloaded, because those boats want to go early in the morning. Do those trucks have refrigerated units or anything that they could hold the lobster till the next day before they unload them?
Did you hear that, Mr. Paul?
Yes, and I think it goes back to my previous answer. We would follow the time requirements with unloading and loading of the trucks in the facility. The lobsters would not have to come in there during peak traffic times, obviously school buses, people commuting to work, etc. We don't want to be a disturbance to the normal traffic and any safety.
Okay. That's not quite the question, though. The question is if the lobsters are unloaded within those time periods and they're put in a refrigerated truck that may run there all night with the reefer going. I think that's
basically whether to be run there or they stay somewhere else until, I guess the question is, will there be any operation of any type after 8 p.m.?
Yeah.
Ideally, when the truck gets to the facility, we want the lobster in the tanks, out of the reefer, into the water, back into the controlled environment.
Okay. No, that's a fair enough answer. We can't get everything right down to an exact science, but the general intent there is that you would operate noise-free outside of those operating hours.
I don't know if it's determined, but the less noise as possible. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
I got a question for staff, Mr. Chair. Considering the current land use is, what kind of bearing does the current land use? One of the arguments is it's predominantly residential, even though it's zoned rural. And what kind of bearing would that have on staff?
Sorry, everybody just got muted. I don't know why. The host just muted everybody. So I did not hear the end of your question, Matt, and I still can't.
We need the planning boardroom unmuted. Judy, are you able to go in there too? Okay, Sam, you can do that.
I think I'll try to start answering the question. I think it was about the current land use for the area, and there's no black and white answer. I mean, the Shamcook rural area, there's the Atlantic salmon facility there, where there's, activity happens. It's where do you draw the line for an area? I think that's also a question. And I think those are the things that PRAC needs to exercise some judgment on. I think there's obviously a lot of stuff that happens on that point, and not all of it is residential. And then the further you get into Shamcook, you've got the clam digger, there's businesses, there are mixed uses. Yes, there are subdivisions and developments that are exclusively residential. But we do look at historical use when we think about these things, and what has occurred there before, because there was obviously some tolerance for that at that time. So I think it's really a judgment call for PRAC, but the Shamcook area has different uses in it. There's no question about that.
Yeah. Well, if it's where I think it is, historically, it had a shipyard there, it had a freezer plant there, it had a dog food, cat food plant there.
We
It
got
had
a
sardine factory there.
How long was
Mr. Chair,
the,
do we have a salmon hatchery close by?
Salmon hatchery's up the hill, so it's,
In the same zone?
same zone?
Same zone?
same zone, well, I'm not sure about that, but,
I mean, one thing I will say on that note is there are standards for what are considered legally non-conforming uses. And that's typically that the use has not ceased for longer than 10 months. So this is far beyond that threshold in terms of what would be by right allowed to happen there. And that's one of the reasons why it's a variance and not just happening.
okay.
I think my point was without seeing, because the subject area on the road is quite small. So without seeing enough of the road leading into it in that immediate area, my assumption would be if it's been residential for 15 years, and then as far as land use, for me that would have some bearing on whether it were. If you're adding something back in that's historical, if it's been quite a long time since it's been there, then I think that would have some bearing on whether it people that have lived there since have what they would expect.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
but, I guess, taking all points of view into consideration, if the popular opinion is that it's a residential area and should be residential, and all those other uses permitted, or not permitted, wouldn't there be as much onus on the residential population to apply for rezoning to have it all residential as there is for, the industrial part of it? Because, just because if I buy a piece of land in what I think is an industrial area, just because I don't develop it for 15 years, does that make it not industrial anymore? It's, there's arguments on both sides, so we're gonna have a hard job here making a decision on it. But
Mr. Chair, just another question, for access to the bay or the water or wharfage or whatever you want to call it, if we change the bylaw from what it is now to residential, and we would continue to do that in other areas, would sooner or later we would.
Well, we're not changing any bylaws.
Okay, but anyway, bottom line is if we close this type of operation off, we are actually closing access to the bay. That's one of my concerns is how much do we keep closing off land for access for fishing or other types of this type of industry?
Well, it's a good point, and
which was,
having grown up in the area, it's a valid point, because most of us can remember when there was substantial commerce going on in that area, and it may have stopped for all sorts of different reasons, whether they be financial or markets or whatever. It didn't necessarily stop just because people built houses there. So, if we have a rural area that permits other uses like workshops and things that would cause noise, and this is truly similar or compatible, then there's no argument. But if it's not similar and compatible to other uses that may be allowed there, for me, that's the question for me. Is it really similar and compatible to anything else that would be allowed based on the present zoning? And if it is, then I would support it. If it's over and above what else might be, allowed there based, and these people that have bought the properties there, researched that years ago and came to that conclusion, then we may have to, come to a different answer. But that, for me, that's the question. If this lobster plant, for whatever reason, doesn't go because we said no, or they back out or whatever, can somebody come in next year legally and put something there that would cause the same amount of noise, pollution, traffic, and so on? If they can do it legally, then to me, it's up to somebody else to change the zoning. If it's legal to do it, then we're hard pressed to say no. There are some I'll let Alex speak to this, but I'll ask it as a question and a comment both, Alex. We have had some experience with of late of the objectives in rural plans. So can you maybe comment on the objectives in this plan and this plan? Please mute if you're not. Maybe that's us.
Mr. Chair, are you looking for me or Xander?
No, Alex, please.
Okay. So when it comes to objectives of the rural plan, we do look at those because they provide the important preamble to the whole document. So when we're looking at this document, we're trying to interpret it and what it meant. We do look at the preamble, which is the objectives. Then we get down to policy, which guides us in how the plan was crafted. So policies telling us what type of development can be allowed on this individual property and what the setbacks are, etc. Policies are guiding how the plan is crafted. So in the view of this, when we look at the policy does not allow for the intrusion of incompatible uses into established residential areas. Now, it does allow light industrial uses throughout the rural zone. So, in the view of the policy, the zone allows for the mixture of uses. And the mixture of uses can include light industrial uses. So it doesn't follow from the policy that you can't allow a particular type of mixed use on a part of the property that may have other types of uses around it. The plan says that these are permitted in this zone. So light industrial uses are permitted in this zone. And where this plan was drafted and it did not contemplate lobster holding facilities, these are more of a more modern innovation from the traditional lobster pound. These are the types of things which have to be considered on a discretionary basis by PRAC in a similar to or compatible with type of decision. So we don't look at that policy as saying that you cannot do this use in this particular property. We would look at that policy as how the plan was crafted and what uses it permitted in this zone. And so it says that light industrial uses are permitted because if they're non-polluting, then they are not going to be intruding and creating land use conflicts with residential areas.
Thank you very much, Alex. That clears up a couple of questions for me. So, at this point, there can be more questions or comments from the committee members, or there can be a motion to, to accept it or reject it, or to table it, or to accept it with further conditions. So it's up to the committee to move on that. Take a minute and think about what everybody has contributed tonight, including the fine people that are opposed to it and the people that would like to move forward with the application. So we do have to consider all the points made and whether they were valid or not valid. Alex has cleared up a lot of the questions on the process and the objectives, and Xander has cleared up the questions on the notification time limits and so on. So I think we have enough information to go ahead with some kind of action here.
I'd like to make a motion. Based on the recommendations of staff, New Brunswick Service Commission staff recommended that the Planning Review and Adjustment Committee consider the proposed lobster holding facility to be considered similar or compatible with light industrial use, subject to the following terms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through to 8. I'm not gonna read them all. I would make a motion that the staff's recommendation be recommended.
It's been moved by Brian Cornish that we approve this application based on staff's recommendation and on the conditions that staff has put on it as written out here. So I would need a seconder for that motion.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Gerald Gass. Are we ready for the question?
Number 2 should have unloading in it too.
Well, we could put it in, but,
You don't need it?
well, yeah, we can put that in there and just say that, that the loading and unloading, be conducted within the hours stated here, 8 to 7, 8 PM to 7 AM. So we can add
I
that.
recommend that, my recommendation,
Yep. So a friendly amendment, we'll add that to it.
loading, unloading.
Loading and unloading.
Time frame stays the same.
Yep, time is the same, and if there are no other questions or comments, I call the question. All in favor, signify by saying aye, please, and raise your hand if you put Dave online for both.
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Aye, okay. That's unanimous? Are there any opposed? No, sorry. Are there any opposed?
Aye.
One opposed, Matt? The motion is carried. Thank you, everyone, for your participation and input. And now, back to the agenda, we will. Sorry, Matt, I turned around there. We're going to move to item number 5, temporary use application, item 22-10-02, Lori and Terry Keating. Xander, Vivian?
That'll be mine, Mr. Chair. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
You're welcome, go ahead.
All right, so let me share my slide with you. I do believe the item number should be 22-10-03. There was an 02 and I think it was crossed off the agenda. So just a little clarification there. Yep, so like Mr. Chair said, it's a temporary use application. It's proposed by Lori and Terry Keating. The subject property is at 14 Union Street in St. Stephen. As you can see on the map on the left, it's at the corner of Union Street and King Street. So it's a pretty busy intersection, I would say. The property has an old church building that was built in 1874. It's quite old. It's not officially designated as a provincially heritage building, but from like a city history perspective, it definitely holds heritage value. I would see that as a valuable architectural asset of St. Stephen. The owners and applicants also bought the extra parking lot, not immediately next to the church building, but like the one next to it, for extra parking for this property. So 14 Union Street is currently zoned R2B. It's like the name suggested, is a residential zone. So a commercial use would not be allowed as a main use as of right. The request here is to open up a new antique store in the old church building. As we established, the current zone doesn't allow it. So the normal process is to go through a rezoning to a commercial zone that would be able to hold a commercial antique store. But as we all know, timing is everything for a business. The applicants want to open it up as soon as possible and to tap into the Christmas season this year. So the proposal here is to apply for a temporary use authorization for a year while working on their rezoning application for the property. Yeah. So under the Community Planning Act and the St. Stephen zoning bylaw, Those regulations empower the advisory committee, PRAC, to approve a temporary use not exceeding a year, to approve for a temporary period not exceeding a year, a development otherwise prohibited by the bylaw. So this is the exact situation here. And this approval could be subject to terms and conditions as PRAC sees fit. Staff has consulted different departments in regards to this application. The town CAO has no concerns. He's well aware of this proposal. The town's building inspector has also been updated on the situations. So if there's anything that requires a building permit, the building inspector is on that. Staff also did a mail out to the neighbors living within 100 meters of the property. No objection, no comments, nothing was received during the consulting period. So the key point when considering a temporary use is whether or not it's considered compatible with the surrounding. As we can see in, as we can see in this zoning map, this property is situated in a network of residential zones. So those are the blue squares, but is also very, very close to the commercial strip on King Street and the downtown area south of it. So it is actually a very reasonable spot for a commercial use. It can be seen as an extension of either the commercial strip on King Street or the downtown area. So it wouldn't be like too much of a standout in this spot. Also, an antique store would be considered a neighborhood commercial use in the current zoning bylaw. So that's a light, like a light commercial use, non-intrusive, low impact sort of commercial use that would be perfect in a neighborhood, like the name suggested. So it wouldn't be it wouldn't have too much of an impact in the surrounding residential neighborhood area as well. And as I talked earlier, this is a very, very old building with lots of history to it. And the proposal is to have an adaptive reuse of the old building and turning it into an antique store. So that would be a good step towards saving this important piece of history in St. Stephen, and it's a good step towards urban revitalization. And here's just a side-by-side comparison of the building before the current applicants bought it, and a bit of a cosmetic renovations that they've done to the building to turn it into this antique store. As we can see, it still preserves the important architectural features of it. So again, it's adding to the value of preserving this important piece of history of St. Stephen. And the last point is to examine whether or not this proposal is in keeping with the municipal plan goal. One goal is to basically support commercial development in town, and this is very much a commercial development at the right spot. So in staff's opinion, this is in line with municipal goals. Staff has also recommended some terms and conditions to minimize impacts, if there's any. So those terms and conditions include limited signage, limited outdoor display, limited hours of operation, and limited disturbances to the neighborhood. Because this is a temporary use of a commercial use in a residential zone, so we still have to make sure that it fits well in the residential neighborhood. So, based on all the above arguments, staff recommends that the Planning Review and Adjustment Committee of the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission authorize this temporary use for a one-year period, subject to the following terms and conditions. Number one is that the applicant shall obtain all applicable approvals, including a building permit, before opening the store to the public. Number two, any signs associated with this temporary use shall comply with sign requirements in residential zones. and the applicants shall obtain proper sign permits. Number 3, no outdoor display shall obstruct pedestrian or vehicular traffic. And number 4, hours of operation shall be limited to 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And lastly, this temporary use shall not become a public nuisance that disturbs the surrounding residential area in regard to generating off-site electrical interference, dust, noise, odor, or smoke. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm open for questions or comments.
Thank you, Vivian. Is that the Zion Church there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have a speaker for the applicant, Alex?
If the applicant is present, I'm not sure if the applicant's name in this case is not the same as the name on the application, but if you're the applicant under a different name, you can use the raise hand function. So, Mr. Chair, I don't believe we have an applicant here tonight.
You're breaking up pretty bad there, Alex. I don't know if it's a loose wire or.
He's in PI.
Oh, he's PI, okay.
Yeah, sorry, we don't have an
Okay, no.
applicant here tonight.
We do not. Is that correct?
There is no applicant, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I'm also a PI, but my sound's better.
All right.
Speaking
Okay.
of PIs.
So, are there any speakers, other speakers for it or against it?
If you're in favor of the application or you're against this application, you can raise your hand right now and I'll promote you to a speaking role.
Okay, we'll proceed, and if somebody does pop their hand up there, we'll entertain them, but we'll open it up to the board members for questions or comments and or motions. David Jesse,
Yes,
any comments or questions or motions or?
no, it seems pretty straightforward to me and no public feedback. I would say it's a good use for the building and I think we should move to a motion.
Is that a motion?
I'll make the motion, sure.
Okay, it's been moved by David Jesse.
I'll second.
Seconded by Raymond Hall. Are there any other questions or comments to the question? Okay, Greg, the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Motion carried. Motion carried, and we're accepting that based on staff's recommendation. So now I guess we get views on that's it for the application. The views on bylaws and regulations, and that's St. George, I believe. Is it Alex? Are you presenting or Sander?
Yeah, that's right, Mr. Chair. So I'm gonna, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you're breaking up a bit there, but I think we can proceed.
All right. I just,
Have one of those.
What do you want?
I don't have one of those copies.
It's only one page. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Just one page there. So.
Oh, okay.
three, we'll start with the Village of Blacks Harbor rural plan amendment. So you can all see this amendment.
We don't have anything on Black's Harbor. Oh, yes, we do. So we're doing Black's Harbor first.
Yeah, if that's all right, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, so this is it's a bit of an interesting amendment. They had a plebiscite back in the last municipal election, so May 2021, to allow for 6 backyard hens in residential zones. So rezonings normally don't go to a plebiscite, but at the time the council felt that they might be best to leave this to the general public's opinion. And the plebiscite actually passed with a majority vote of the village residents, so they majority want this amendment to take place. But what happened was the village was working without professional planning support, and they attempted an amendment that didn't quite get through to the final stages, and it didn't become a bylaw. So they had some challenges getting the amendment through, and so since we've been working with them, we realized that this amendment had never been properly adopted. And the village administration initiated this and asked us to review this. So what we did is we looked at this proposal, we slightly modified it, including more than just chickens, but potentially ducks, rabbits, or other types of small livestock to be allowed in the residential zones of the village. And we included a definition of what a village agricultural use is. This is different from general agricultural uses. In general agriculture uses, you have livestock operations and other types of cash crops or grain or hay fields, which are allowed in the village in their rural zone. But this is just for your either the built up parts of the village, the parts with the sewer and water and the close knit old company houses. So in these areas, you can have a backyard garden with up to 6 small livestock. So it's defined. It doesn't include roosters because in residential areas, they can be a noise nuisance. Conditions as to how it can be conducted: maximum 6, no roosters, kept in an enclosed area during the day, and an accessory structure at night. 33 feet from any adjacent dwelling unit for the small livestock enclosure. That's to reduce the impact of manure smells. And that they're not kept inside a dwelling unit, and that odor is not detectable at any adjacent property line. So basically with good backyard farming principles, you shouldn't be smelling a lot of chicken manure. I actually have chickens myself. I take care of them and take care of their little run. It's a pretty simple setup, and a lot of people are doing this nowadays. So it's compatible with the rural plan policies, and as I mentioned in the report, through reducing potential conflicts of use, but also in terms of promoting sustainable residential development. Because with residential development nowadays, it's really important to think about the potential for people to grow their own food. It's becoming more and more important as things like COVID revealed to us. So I think that concludes my report. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Henderson from PEI. Do we have any comments from anybody on that?
What about people, I know the zoning on this one because our grandson's babysitter has chickens and she lives in Black. She has a double lot, and at the time, the lots were, you could have 6 for each lot. She has 12 hens. Is that gonna make her get rid of her 6 of her birds because of this?
Over to you, Alex. Did you hear that?
Yeah, so lot, if that's the case, there would be an issue, because lot is all the adjacent properties. They count as one lot for the purposes of the bylaw if they own both lots. So we actually had the public hearing of objections last night, and I was on the telephone for the public hearing, and there was another individual in the village who has up to 20. And they're in a similar kind of boat. They're on the edge of the residential zone. They have a very large lot, and their neighbors have no issue with their 20 hens. So what the council asked me, and they said, so how would you deal with that kind of situation? And I said, well, that's what PRAC is for. So if you have a situation where somebody has a double lot, or they have 20, or they have a large large land, like maybe it's a several acre property happens to be residential zone, then you can apply to PRAC for a variance on the number of livestock that you are permitted to have. In a case where you already have them, I'd have to look at the individual case by case to see how long they've been having them for, because it may be something that could be legal non-conforming, aka grandfather, if it happened before the bylaw was in place that currently prohibits them. So we have to look at it, and I don't really need to know the details of this person right now tonight, but if your person is interested, I'd suggest you get them to contact me.
Okay, that was just on their behalf. And I know what you mean about the grandfather thing, because that's what affected us.
Okay, at any rate, we're just giving our views. We're only providing our views on this. We're not making decisions, right? Okay, so, you know, part of our view, I guess, or our recommendation would be that that they look at clarifying that, you know, in the adoption of this bylaw, that they look at clarifying, you know, what's grandfather, what's not, and whether it's on one lot, two lots, or whatever. From my own personal point of view, not knowing much about it, but I would be looking at it as a case where I'd almost look at it myself as, you know, not necessarily whether it's a double lot, but how many houses are there. You know, if there's one family, you know, and these chickens are for sort of family use, then I don't think we should let somebody have 30 chickens just because they get a big lot. But if you have a double lot, even if you own them both and there's two families on it, maybe that's something they could look at.
That's pretty gonna run into a conflict.
Yeah.
But how would the idea that they want to take and have home-based businesses be impacted here? Because say I wanted to take and have 100 hens and start selling eggs, and it's a non-intrusive home-based business, and you see it all the time now. And so if you have room to take and have more hens and stuff like this, can it be done under that scenario?
But I'll let Alex answer, but the way I'm reading it here is limited to six
That's
hens.
for your own use.
Yeah.
If it's a home-based business,
Well, then
could it be approved under that?
yeah, but that would be a different.
Yeah,
A
you'd be
different zoning or bylaw.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'd have to go for a different type of an approval.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The agricultural use says you can't sell.
Yeah.
Already.
Oh, it does, okay.
Oh, that's right?
Yeah.
I didn't read that.
That's
So,
Does include Henry piggeries, marketing for sale.
Where did you get those? Go ahead. Is there somebody
No, you're
on the
getting
line there
feedback.
muted or feedback or? Okay. Great. Any other comments, questions? Mr. Jesse?
No, I'm good. I like it. I think it's a good update.
Okay. Well, do we have consensus with everybody that, we'll wait for Gerald, for Brian to come back, but everybody else is okay with the village proceeding with this?
with looking into
With clarifying the
Yeah.
double lot issue?
Are there going to be any restrictions around storage of like feed and grains and stuff like that? Because that does attract rats, rodents, weasels, that sort of thing in your neighborhood. I store mine in my garage in a bin, so. Yeah, so it's in a secure place. Yeah. And most people do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you'll want the price anyway. Well, the price of feed right now is $28 a day. You want to feed them to the cats. Yeah.
Well, that's something that we could, advise them to consider.
I just got a question there, I want to get it clarified. Now, if they pass this, and the people that have the double lot and wanna have the things, now they gotta pay to get a variance, or are they gonna be grandfathered in?
Like Alex said, it depends on how long they've had them.
Yeah,
Most of
it
them go
depends.
within a year.
It's case by case. If they don't have those chickens right now, and they want to comply with the bylaw and have more than what's permitted, then yes, they have to pay for a variance, and there's only one cost for variance, unfortunately. So if you deem it minor, it's still same cost.
So if they already have them, then they don't have to apply for a variance, they just have to apply for consideration as to whether to keep them or not.
It's not a sure thing, because the bylaw currently doesn't allow for this. So if they only recently got chickens, and so I think the bylaw's been in place since 2011. If they had it before that, it's possible, but I don't want to say for sure or no. There's also even.
I'm sorry, Alex, didn't mean to interrupt you, but I thought it was in the last, like when they had their last election, when John was elected, is when they allowed chickens. Before that, they wouldn't have allowed.
So you're talking about in Blacks Harbor?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they weren't allowed. They may have been tolerated as a something that was going on, but the village wasn't enforcing their rural plan. So that can happen. And I think maybe in this case with the bylaw helps clarify what the village wants to set down as rules for people who are considering doing this.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we've got consensus with everybody, but you, Brian, you're in the room, so you're okay with this, or? Okay, so what we're proposing to put into the letter to St. George Town Council is that we, Blacks Harbor, I'm sorry, is that we are in favor of them proceeding with this bylaw with the only addition that they consider limits on storage of feed.
And lot size.
And the clarifying the amount of chickens, per lot and lot size, whether it's single, double, or otherwise. So I'll let you put the right words in that, Alex, but I think you get the gist of what we're saying here. So we want clarification on the lots and the number of chickens, and also that there be some consideration that storage of feed and so on be not stored of such a quantity that might attract rodents and so on. We'll leave it up to the town to decide how they do that, but.
2 years.
Okay with that?
All right. Yep.
Okay.
So I'll go on to the next bylaw, if that's all right, Mr. Chair.
Sure, go ahead, go to St. George then.
St. George.
Yeah.
So our
There we go.
42 pages. This zoning bylaw to implement the new St. George municipal plan, bylaw 25C. The current bylaw is 25B. So we're keeping the numbers. So break it out into the general bylaw, clauses, definitions, administrative clauses. So this is talking about things like getting a sign permit or a development permit, the general revisions. So these are things that apply to the entirety of the town or multiple zones. So you could take the livestock section, which featured heavily in the discussions with council. And we can go through some of that with a report that I included. The sign section, We have the special use standard. So this is a special, we don't have it's not a zone, but if you're going to develop a mini home park, then you got to follow the special use category. It's allowed in more than one zone. We got our urban zones and our rural zones. So it's a bit of a different concept. We don't have residential zones or commercial zones, institutional zones. We just have urban and rural zones. So we have, this is based out of the concept that's from the municipal plan. And it follows with, largely with some of the current zoning thinking that, that St. George has, but also brings in some innovation. So we'll get through some of that in a moment, but urban zones follow the serviced area of the town of St. George largely. And the rural zones follow those areas that are unserviced. So you'll see how and why in a moment when I'm going to get to some of the permitted uses in those zones. I'm going to jump ahead to those. There's a lot of text in here, which we used a lot of the similar stuff you've seen in St. Stephen's bylaw. And in St. Stephen's bylaw, we used a lot of things that were from St. George's bylaw. So they're not exclusive to one community. So we've been borrowing and sharing different ideas between all the regions. So, but one thing you'll note here when it comes to parking standards, which we had in St. Stephen's bylaw, which is very similar here, with some changing terminologies for St. George that are unique to St. George. But we also have a parallel parking category. So that was PRAC's idea last time around. We had a bylaw like this. So I'm going to jump ahead though to the zones, and we can talk about the agricultural thing in particular if I have to report. Yeah, this is not actually a zone. This is the mini home category. So these aren't fee simple lots. These are just leased sites within a mini home park. So we don't really have the same kind of, we did think this actually warranted to have its own zone. I think it makes sense to be something that's permitted in certain higher impact zones.
Yeah, you're breaking up very bad.
Alex, you're breaking up quite bad. We're not getting the gist of it, probably at all.
Okay.
I can't read anything either.
Maybe I'm gonna stop my video. Wonder if that helps. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can hear you, but we can't see much.
Okay. Can you see the zoning bylaw?
Yes.
The sheet of paper.
Okay. So the concept here is U1 is an urban zone with the least development intensity. This would be similar to like an R2 zone, but it also allows by right neighborhood commercial uses as small scale secondary and institutional uses as small scale secondary. Normally you might have to get a rezoning if you want to do a little corner store or a little daycare. In this case, you wouldn't have to do it because it's by right you can do these uses. Now, small scale secondary use means it doesn't predominate the visual appearance of the building, and it only occupies up to 25% of the gross floor area. So that's a way to control it, but reduces some of the red tape around having to go through a rezoning if you wanted to do a small little business. And this is one of the ideas that came straight out of the municipal plan and the discussions with the community. So some of that red tape they were looking to get rid of and to simplify things. Now, a U2 zone, this would be similar to what you might have with a mixed use zone or a medium density residential zone. So he allows medium density residential up to 10 dwelling units, but also allows secondary neighborhood commercial uses up to 200 square meters. That's just over 2,000 square feet. Or institutional use of the same floor area. And that's where you get those higher density, a little bit higher density, but not apartments, large apartments. So it'd be small apartment buildings
Hey,
or
Alex.
smaller retail operations.
Get the,
Excuse me, Alex.
that's fine. I'll say it after. No, I was saying the accessory dwelling unit, that seems like a new thing.
Okay, yes. Yeah, and this bylaw, accessory dwelling units are permitted in all of the zones in the urban and rural settings. So these are a popular thing for people to provide a little accommodation for a family member or a tenant on their property in a building that is accessory. No, it's not. So it's not the predominant use of the build or property, but it would be like a little backyard suite that you can rent out. So there is, in this zoning bylaw, is very permissive with regard to residential development because there is a housing crisis and a housing shortfall currently. So the bylaw is certainly opening up a lot of opportunity for people to provide rental accommodations without having to go through a lot of steps. So it's the part of the thinking here is to just allow the things that are desperately needed. And St. George's vacancy rate is dangerously low. This U3 zone is your probably standard commercial type zone. This allows for neighborhood commercial uses and large format commercial uses. This be their highway oriented things or things that are very auto oriented, like auto repair or gas bars, etc. But the large format has to go to PRAC because those things can have impacts with regard to high traffic volume. So these should not just be permitted by right. They need to be evaluated for terms of considering where the driveway is located, considering landscaping, considering fencing, other things that you guys are all familiar with in terms of reducing the impacts on neighbors. But other types of uses are permitted. Another thing which could be permitted is light industrial use, but as a small scale secondary use. So what could this be? Well, if you have a commercial business and you want to do some of your own production of, say, you're producing your own beverages and you have a little packaging and distributing side of your retail business, well, you can do some small scale, 25% gross floor area, light industrial use, as long as it doesn't predominate the physical appearance of the building. So it's quite permissive in regard to what you can do, but has good standards as well in terms of making sure there's green space on the site. If you're going to have what each dwelling unit requires its own green space. Parking is located to side or rear to reduce the amount of the physical appearance of having all your parking and loading areas out in the front. We have size limits for the units and minimums for the actual gross floor area of the building. So these are this area is zoned along your arterial and your high visibility collector streets. So where you have good access and good potential commercial development. So St. George wants to diversify how much commercial offerings they have. Currently, they're lacking in a few areas. With regard to their downtown zone, if that's what you want to call this is a U4, so this is your highest intensity zone, but it's located primarily in their downtown of St. George. So downtown commercial use, which is a wide-ranging zone, but has limitations around certain types of activities that wouldn't be compatible with the downtown setting. High density residential use, but not on the ground floor. So you want to maintain that commercial streetscape, institutional uses. And again, light industrial use as a small scale secondary use. So it's not an industrial zone, but if you have a business where you're doing a little bit of production of some kind or a little distribution and loading of goods, then you can use that as one of the provisions to allow you to run your business in a creative fashion. So similar to other downtown zones you might see, you need to have a commercial use along the front and flankage yards. If you're going to have residential in the rear of the first floor, that's fine. And if you're residential above, that's also fine. But there's also requirements for parking areas and buffering for parking lots. So downtowns, it's best if your parking lot is screened or there's some landscaping around the parking area. So it provides a good aesthetic streetscape. We have an industrial zone that puts heavy industry into terms and conditions. So PRAC would have to review those. Light industrial permitted by right and utility use is permitted by right. But also potentially, depending on the type of use it is, you might have agricultural uses. And in this area, industrial zone, we put that as something which is a potential, but subject to terms and conditions. In addition to that, resource excavation use. So this is not including mining. This would be like a gravel pit, for example. And there is a gravel pit operating in St. George currently, but this would be something if there's a new one to be opened, have to be done with terms and conditions evaluated. So some particular standards here, talking about outdoor storage areas, be screened from view and locating any salvage use in a rear yard location. So that is not a predominant view from the street, because the industrial zone in St. George has high visibility on the road down to Back Bay. We have a conservation zone. So the primary use here is conservation, parks, and open space, but you could have some public institutional uses subject to terms and conditions to protect the environment. This is not a zone for development. It is a zone primarily to have parks or to have environmental preservation areas. And this is zoned largely around undevelopable wetlands and other water courses. We have a rural zone. So this is a zone that is for traditional rural development. So mix of uses. You can do some small scale neighborhood commercial uses, mini homes, camps, but subject terms and conditions would be a campground development. So if you're doing more than one camp, pardon me, apologize, or are you doing an agricultural use? Because it's not an agricultural zone, so there'd be a high degree of residential development in these rural settlement areas. But people still have hobby farms or reasonably sized agricultural operations in these rural areas, or gravel pits. Potentially, you might have a good source of aggregate that you've been looking to exploit. Well, you could do these in the rural areas, but subject to terms and conditions at PRAC. Again, 8 accessory dwelling units to be permitted as well. There's several conditions here depending on if you have sewer and water. So you may have, you may be in a rural zone, but you might be one of those lots that has access to municipal sewer and water. So there's a few spots where that could be the case. We have our agricultural zone, and this is a zone that is primarily for agricultural forestry uses. You can do gravel pits subject to terms and conditions at PRAC. And agriculture, as I mentioned in a report in detail, we evaluated this in consultation with Council, Department of Agriculture, and the Western Valley Regional Service Commission, which has a lot of experience with planning and agriculture. And we modified several sections to this. So I'm going to show you what exactly happened there. So after a council working group meeting, we were advised to talk with DAF. We looked at the term agricultural use, and we made sure it incorporated everything under the Agricultural Operations Practices Act. So this allows for many things, but didn't include things that St. George wanted, like farmers markets in its agricultural zone, or animal support services like vet clinics, like the St. George Veterinary Clinic and Dog Park. So we wanted those as well in agricultural use. We also wanted to make sure we were using reasonable animal units controls, and this was reviewed by Council, staff, and we talked with another very experienced planner in this area. So what we have settled on seems to work for those three stakeholders, or not stakeholders, I guess you could say, three groups we talked to. Council is the stakeholder here. We just made some modifications around. We talked about the parallel parking. We made sure that was included because we had this original draft before we heard from PRAC about a similar bylaw in a different town. We also modified the setback conditions for livestock facilities to make sure it's more on course with what the province sets as a minimum. Minimum the province has is 30 meters for livestock facilities from adjacent water courses. But we also have potable water sources, so wells and dwelling units. So we suggested going up to 60 meters. So it is a reduction from 90, but a bit of a compromise there. We also have reciprocal setbacks. So if you're going to have a livestock operation that's licensed, then you should be set back in the same, in a similar fashion than the livestock operation has to be set back from you. And when I say you, I mean residential development. So it's been an issue where all the onus for buffering shouldn't necessarily be on the people trying to do the farming. It also should apply to people who want to do residential development around the farmers. We just talked about some of the modifications we made to make sure we are compatible with the municipal plan. And we also took out some of the stringent requirements around detectable manure smells on a property line, because the provincial legislation, the Agricultural Operations Protections Act, actually allows you to make manure smells on your farm that drift around and go to other properties if it's part of acceptable farm practices. So we shouldn't be trying to contradict provincial legislation there, and we modified the plan or the zoning bylaw to match that. So this is the map. You can see red is the downtown area. The orange is that U3 mixed zone that allows for commercial developments. The U2 is a lighter medium density mixed zone, and the U1 is what you might associate with a more residential zone, but it's a low impact zone featuring only modest mixed uses. Green is your viable agriculture areas. So these are areas that were assessed for good soil. Brown is areas that you just have traditional rural style developments, larger lots, or mixture of uses, homes, camps, etc. So, and dark green is the conservation. So this is largely in the Ducks Unlimited wetland and some of the parks, and the town of St. George Lagoon, put that in there. And we have industrial zoning around the industrial park, but also some properties that are well embedded into the industrial park, which we've zoned industrial, but may not be used for industrial today. So there's been some conflicts, zoning conflicts for people who've been located well in the industrial park, as we know, which that whole area has been designated for industrial in the general future land use plan. So this is the kind of thing that the town wants to phase in over time. They're grandfathered in, so if you're residential, you can keep going, you can keep continuing there, but that is now an industrial zone, and we've made it more, we haven't broken it up, and that's one of the things we had to restore. So some uses in there are going to be grandfathered, they'll continue, but it is an industrial area now, and it's that's what council set in their municipal plan. I will note, there's one thing which the town of St. George CAO has pointed out, that there's a property located right here across from the Atlantic Baptist Housing that I'll just zoom in. So it's this property here that we actually talked about in the council working session that was supposed to go to a U3 zone. And there's a potential housing development that would match the U3 zone. And the CEO has asked PRAC to look at that and suggest whether or not that should go to a U3 zone now, because there's potential housing development that is waiting in the wings in this one property right here. So I don't know if I could point that with my pen here, just a second. So it would be this property. So he's asking the committee to look at that property. So should that go to U3 in advance of the bylaw being adopted, or do they need to go for rezoning later? But it was discussed at a council working group session, but didn't make it for the first reading. So I will go down here, and this is our water hazard zone. So St. George is 2010 flooded very severely. And if you're in this area, then the only way you can develop is if you're developing in consideration of that flood line. And there's requirements for where the habitable part of the building can be, given the flood elevations that are known. So there's requirements in the zoning bylaw related for development in that area. So I'm going to stop there. It's a long bylaw. I'm sure you have some questions, so I'm happy to answer anything. Over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alex. There's quite a bit of stuff there to absorb, but by the same token, it was well presented, and seems like there's been a lot of, consultation with council and so on. So I personally don't have any comments or objections to it.
I have one question. Alex, wouldn't it make sense to put that property into the zone now, rather than just have them come back here in a very short time and have to go through a change?
Yeah, that is definitely one way to do it, because if you add a bunch of delays for developers, their timing can be everything in projects, and they're hoping not to lose that project. So if PRAC wants to advise that it be included, then council can just make that amendment at third reading. So it'd still be council's choice, but you can definitely bring that forward to them. And the CEO is suggested that it may be something you want to consider.
Was that the lot, Raymond, that Keith was going to put the building supply center on there years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and
it's been up in the air for the last 15 years.
Yeah, I remember when they had it there. They were at the mall, weren't they, for a while? And they were going to build
They were going to go over there, and then another company was going to build there, and then they renamed them.
Because they put the gravel pad down there. So what is it they want to do now? They want to include it as
A U2
commercial?
I think it's for a residential multi-unit, I think, isn't it, Alex?
Yes, exactly. So they want to go. What they want to do would be something in the realm of I think a 40 unit potential apartment development.
It's right across the road from the seniors place there.
Yeah.
So
and actually, yeah, the zoning currently. Oh, sorry.
You go ahead.
Yeah, the zoning currently allows for a large apartment development with a commercial component. It's C3 right now, general commercial. So this zoning bylaw unintentionally downzone this property. So I would suggest you consider making that suggestion to council, because I think it actually would be more or less a correction, because that U2 zone is less permissive than what they currently have, and the general gist of this bylaw is to make residential development more permissive through the municipality.
I go along with that. I agree with that. So
the only, I guess the only consideration would be if the town felt they needed to add conditions or terms or do a development agreement, they might want to keep it as a U2, but it sounds like they want to do the opposite.
Well, they have the final decision on it, but if they're looking for our reviews, then that is our view. Is everybody in agreement with that? Yep. David? Yep.
I'm good with it. Yeah.
Okay. So, If there's no other comments, then I think, Alex, we're prepared to give the town our, you know, our blessing on moving ahead with this with the recommendation that they include that lot and zone it however it is they want zoned now and get it over with, so that you know, at town's discretion and so that somebody doesn't have to come back and apply for, you know, rezoning or variance and so on. If they're in favor of it now, then like you say, if it's the correction, then that would be our view from this committee.
All right, I'll get that written down.
Okay, that sounds good. It's getting a bit late here, 8:45. We've been here for a while. There is item 7 is PRAC business, and I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I don't think we want to stay here too much longer tonight. Is
Mr. Chair,
that business that is public business, Alex, or can we discuss it after we adjourn?
So we put that in there because we talked about this some weeks ago, so maybe we have to just refresh your memory of that. We talked about the idea of having a standing item on the agenda like views on bylaws or regulations, just in case PRAC has something related to its business that it wants to bring up. So I think the idea is if anybody, if you ask anybody that has any business that they want to address, it's not to go on for a long time, but it's not an in-camera discussion, your PRAC business. So you might consider it is part of the open session. We do have attendees still listening right now. But if there's something that you feel that is something that should be dealt with in camera, and I would suggest you follow municipal guidelines around that, meaning like it'd have to be a legal issue, labor issue, or land. You wouldn't be dealing with land issues because buying and selling property, but a human resource issue or a legal issue. So if you have an issue with your membership, like if there's an issue, like one of your members needs to be disciplined or something like that for not acting in accordance with the bylaws, you could go to camera for that. But I would suggest this is something you might want to just deal with as general issues you're comfortable that aren't in camera items, but you just want to get addressed. So if you need to relay something to the PMC or to the board in the new version of the bylaws, if there's going to be new bylaws that don't have that kind of layer of PMC, I don't know. We don't know at this point, but this is something for you to use or not.
Okay, so what we'll do then is it's 10 to 9. We're not going to stay any longer than 9, and hopefully before that. But so it's pretty well limited to if any member has any suggestion that they want Alex to bring forward to the RSC board that has to do with PRAC business bylaws, procedures, or whatever, that you know, make the comment and ask them to do that. But it's not something we're going to discuss for, you know, half an hour here tonight. But
which is something I'd like to bring up, just so that when I'm gone out of here, then I won't have any say in anything. But what I'm thinking is that you people should be getting your heads together within the next 3 or 4 months, and you should be looking at getting the same amount of money as what the board does, because we put in more time than what the board members do. That's all I'm saying. We're spending more time going over stuff than what the board has to.
Yeah.
That may change a lot in the future, but it's still, we've been behind. We've been behind for quite a while.
Yeah, and we will discuss that just for a minute, and I agree with that. And I think that the problem with a lot of committees over the years is somebody's just picked a number and said, oh, well, that's all you need for a meeting because it's an hour or 2 hours, and they're forgetting the background and work that goes into it and some of the work after, and not, I don't want to sound gratuitous here, but like the letters that have to be signed and everything more, I still have to do that. You know, and Alex will send them to me and I have to, it doesn't take a lot of time, but I do have to open the emails up, see what they are, read them.
Well, see, that could be the
Sometimes
same,
proofread it,
that
send
could
it
be the
back.
same thing as the way the board does. Because
Yeah.
the chair gets another $25 or whatever it is higher than what the.
Yeah,
board member
just a
gets.
token
Yeah.
to cover that extra work and usually like if we're having special meetings or anything like that, there's always some conversations that I have to have with Alex that nobody else does and but for all of us, I would agree that maybe some consideration should be given to I don't even know how they would do it, but maybe a stipend for the meeting and a flat rate per file or something like that, if it was, $5 a file plus your stipend, some kind of a process there to compensate us fairly, because to be honest, with what I'm hearing from these residential, the rural district councils that are gonna be in place, they're gonna be taking home about $1,200 a meeting based on what I've heard. Yeah, $5,000 a year. That's what I've heard. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but
I wouldn't be surprised.
up to a maximum of 4 meetings a year. So it looks like in this new government reform that the government has recommended salaries for councilors and mayors based on the size of the population and all that sort of thing, but they haven't seemed to address what committee members get. So, and I know that would be an RSC decision, but that's a good point. So maybe Alex, you could make a note of that. And if there's an opportunity to, bring that forward, then we should do that. At this point in time, we really don't know if any of us are gonna be here after the end of December. There's no guarantee that the rest of us will be here. So, I mean, your term is up, and mine's good for 2 years, but it doesn't mean they're gonna keep us. They could decide in January that whole new.
I've been employed for 4 years.
Yeah, it could be a whole new,
But we don't even know.
regime,
We have no idea. We just have no idea.
No, I personally suspect that probably based on how many files they had, or planning commission has or whatever, that it's probably gonna be a month or two after January before they make any decisions, because they've got to get their new board together and everything, but
how's it gonna impact Alex's crew? Like, where do they get the decision making if it goes on for 3 or 4 months? Just stop?
well, no, if they, unless the new board, I think, unless the new board decides right away to disband the committee, then they'd have to appoint another committee right away. And Alex's authority would be still gonna be based on RSCs.
They can't do that because they're gonna have too much on their plate
Oh, I know.
for the first 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, but,
There's no way.
yeah,
Nothing surprises me.
but everybody said it takes 5 years for government reform to go through too, with Mr. Lamb. Pulls us on that one, so anyway,
All the work starts on January the 1st.
yeah. So it just depends,
Trust
but
me, I know.
anyway, I think Alex could probably, speak to that better than I could, but do you know, Alex, have you heard any rumors or suggestions? Are they asking you for advice on PRAC, or is that something you can discuss?
And nothing in an official capacity, and it's currently there wouldn't be any amendments to the PRAC bylaws that can be made without it going through PMC. So unless there's going to be a new procedural bylaw of the commission that doesn't include a PMC, I don't know what the new format is. And I'm not saying the PMC is going away for sure. But the way I've understood from Hollis what the current thought is about streamlining the committees, it may not be included in the final formation. So advice coming up through PRAC might become more important. So this is where it's a good test to have this item on your agenda tonight, because there may be more of a purpose for this item going forward.
Okay, thank you. What I would suggest to everybody then is that, you know, between now and the next meeting, if you have any advice for, you know, the new RSC or bylaws change or whatever, that you maybe just kind of jot it down and get it off to Alex or Alex and me or both. And if there's something that we're able to discuss maybe at the next meeting, then we could do it then and have them pass it on. So everybody kind of think about, I mean, it's easy to say that, it's hard to do because we don't know what they're gonna do, but.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm almost guaranteed there won't be any PMC.
No,
It's all gonna be done by the board.
Yeah, I'm
Everything's
pretty sure
gonna be
of
done
that
by the board.
too, yeah. So,
Everything, instead of having committee meetings and everything, it's all gonna be done right at the board level.
yeah,
And that's where your committees are gonna be.
so,
No, they may have some set up for some like finance, not a.
yeah.
So your board members basically are your mayors and one person?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, the PRAC it has been an arm's length committee, so I don't see them changing that part of it. I can see where all the other committees might be gone, but.
I can't see that working.
Because like your PACs in the towns that have their own PACs,
Yeah.
they're not all mayors and council members, they're members of the community with maybe one or two reps from, you know, from the council, but, I think St. Andrews has maybe, do they have one councillor on there, Alex, on their PAC? Or are they all community
Yes, they
members?
do.
Yeah. But only one
They
of the
do.
6 don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, we're basically a consulting firm for the whole area.
yeah.
Independent opinions. Like this one tonight, that would be an interesting one if you were just in the town versus independent people from all around.
Well, yeah, because that one that we did tonight, if that's 6 months from now, that would be St. Andrews PAC, it wouldn't be us. So, anyway, did you have something to say there, Dennis?
I move we adjourn.
Good man. Okay.
If I could,
Thanks, David.
Out of consideration for Judy, if you guys don't mind to move the conversation to the parking lot, because Judy's been very patient. She's been there since 8 a.m. this morning, so I think she's probably pretty eager to go home. So if you guys wouldn't mind.
Just one thing,
Thank you so
Alex,
much.
before you go, bring us
Appreciate you
some
guys.
lobster.
Have a good night.
Bring us some lobster.
Yeah, well, I know when I had a meeting